last week on the Active Self-Protection Podcast. That night, you were patrolling in the Tempe area.
I got on the PA, just pick the sign up or go to jail. So I began sizing him up. I said, well, at this time, we're done. The idea of taking him in custody, give him a citation and kicking him loose, that was out the door. Took out my taser and I red dotted him. The first cartridge hit. On the video, you can see he kind of flinched down real quick and came right back up. Once I deployed that second cartridge, that's when he actually charged me. When I just made the decision to use deadly force, pulled my weapon out, I have a bad backdraw. I can't shoot. I started pulling the weapon back just a little bit, see if I can get a better shot. And it was then he grabbed the top of my weapon.
Hey gang, Palm Peace of Mind Industries is the OC of choice for the Active Self-Protection team. We love their mission and the efficacy of their product. We love the flip-top reversible clips. We love everything about them. They have removed any excuse to not carry OC. OC will solve far more problems than a firearm ever will, and I wouldn't leave the house without it. I just bought one for my daughter, and I have a good friend who used it successfully in a real-life defensive encounter. Get one at get-asp.com/palm. Get-asp.com/palm. Hey there, self-defenders. Don't forget to stick around after today's second part interview as we sit down with Stephen Gutowski and we discuss California attempting to take away existing high-capacity magazines from otherwise law-abiding citizens, and we discuss the interview between Alec Baldwin and George Stephanopoulos on ABC News. Don't miss it.
He dropped the slide of the weapon, and then again, training kicked in. I said, no, he's not getting my gun. So I pulled back as I was with my right hand, and I was stripping his hand off with my left, and then I re-engaged. I was still getting kicked in the head. I couldn't tell you how many times I was kicked in the head, but it was at that time he had moved slightly over to my left, where I could see the window, the front passenger window, and what we call the A pillar, which is that first post for the supports the roof. I could see the A pillar, the window, and then I saw the B pillar, which is between the front and back seat. And he was to the right, to his right would be my left of that. And I said, okay, now I have a good shot because Diana is not in my backdrop anymore. And then I re-engaged. I actually shot across my chest. And at this time, I can only see out of my right eye because my left eye had been swollen shut. I said, okay. And then we have this drill that we do at the range. It's called the failure drill. You go two to the body, then one to the head, two to the body, one to the head. And so I did two to the body. And the headshot is if that person doesn't go down after the first two. So muscle memory kicked in. And I said, I fired 2 rounds. And then I couldn't really see him. I saw a black silhouette. And I knew it was him because there's nobody else out there. I could see a black silhouette in the passenger seat, which I knew was Diana, and I knew she hadn't moved. And so I fired 2 rounds, and the silhouette disappeared. And I said, wow, where did he go? And I was still laying on my side, and I looked across and I could see him laying on the ground. I saw a pool of blood starting to form around his head. And I said, okay, I got him, but I still need to get up. I need to get up. I need to fight. I need to get that defensive position to where he's not going to get up, because I didn't know where I hit him. I had absolutely no clue. I tried to push myself up, and I couldn't get up. I was spent, and my head was still swimming. I didn't know really much of anything other than he's on the ground, and as I'm pushing myself up, I couldn't get up. And then I said, wait, where's my weapon? And I panicked for a second. I went, where the hell is my gun? And I looked, and my weapon was standing right next to my hand. So I just grabbed that, That time I got a hold of my radio and I yelled out 998, 998, which is officer needs help, shots fired. And then I heard what's called the hot tone. It's just a steady tone alerting everybody that there's an emergency. And then it just it beeps every 5 seconds. It means to hold the channel, nobody talks. And it's called a marker. So I heard the marker and I said, I can't get up. I said, I'm hearing the marker. So I'm going to lay here and I'm going to keep an eye on him. And I'm just going to, because I knew the cavalry was arriving, because I would hear people 1922, I'm en route, and everybody saying, I'm en route, I'm en route, I'm en route. And as I was laying there, I still had my weapon on him. And I said, excuse my language, but, I was thinking, if this son of a bitch even so much as flinches, I'm going to, after what we've gone through, I said, if this son of a bitch even so much as flinches, I'm just going to empty my magazine into him, because I'm not, he's going to take me out. He's going to takes me out. He's going to take Diana out, and then he's going to take everybody else out down the road. And so it was about 20 or 30 seconds later that I felt somebody coming up to me, and I looked up and I could see a Tempe police patch, on a blue uniform.
It's a good feeling.
And where it happened was on the north side of what they call the Rural Road Bridge, and at Crest. Well, on the south side of that crest, there was a couple of Tempe cops working an off-duty traffic control job. And when they had heard the shots, they said, well, we need to go check this out.
Sure.
So when they got to the crest of the bridge, I found out they saw my lights and stuff. And then that's when the countywide broadcast came out that, well, we have an officer down. And it was, they said, yeah, it's at Rural and Playa del Norte. So they just came blazing on in. So they were there within 30 seconds to a minute after my shooting. 30 seconds after I put out my 998 call, I looked over and I was still looking at the suspect. And this Tempe cop's going, you're good. Are you all right? Are you all right? And I looked over at where the suspect was, and there was another Tempe cop handcuffing, and which is standard procedure, right, for any law enforcement agency. What's called cold cuffing, regardless of the injuries that suspect has, we have to secure him, and we can always take those handcuffs off later. Well, he was cold cuffing him, and I was trying to get up. I said, I got to get up, because I was having a hard time breathing, and he goes, well, lay down. And I said, stand me the F up. I can't effing breathe. He gets me up. I still have my weapon in my hand, and I'm trying to holster my weapon, and I can't find my holster. And I've never had that problem, but of course I've never been kicked in the head. I don't know how many times either. So he actually helps me secure my weapon. And he walks me over to a barrier wall on the where the sidewalk is. And as I'm walking over, I look back and I see the suspect, and I said, is he done? And he goes, yeah, he's dead. And I went, wow, okay. He gets me over the barrier wall, and the first thing I said, and I didn't remember it until I looked at the investigative report some months later, that I guess I had said that I said, I've been on this job for 32 years. I've never had to do this. And he walks me over the barrier wall, and I'm leaning over the barrier wall, catching my breath. And it takes me about 30 seconds to a minute to catch my breath and realize now what happened. And when I was just starting to push myself up, trying to gauge my compass, so to speak, to where I was at, I heard the fire engine show up, because I heard the air brakes of it. And And then I turn around and I see all these tan uniforms, and I see blue uniforms, the tan with the DPS, the troopers, and the blue uniforms, the Tempe cops that were there. And I see them, I see my ride along stepping out of the driver's side of the patrol car. They're asked because the suspect was just literally laying right next to the right side of the car. I was the senior guy, and I'm kind of like it's kind of like the ramrod. I'm the old man. They called me the kids on the road. They always called me Grandpa. So Grandpa started barking out orders. It was just muscle memory. I want an interior tape here. I want an exterior tape over setting up a crime scene. And they go, we got it, Hugh. We got it. Well, they walked me over to the front of the fire truck, and as I'm getting to the fire truck, I'm taking the keepers off of the gun belt, which is the little leather things that keep our gun belt up from sliding down our pants. And I'm throwing those things everywhere. And I take my gun belt off and I throw it on the front bumper of the fire truck. And I literally just threw it. I said, somebody secure my weapon. And so they take my gun belt, and they said, well, we need to get scene photographs of you before you go to the hospital. They couldn't take it in the front of the fire truck because of the lights. They moved to the side of the fire truck. And I'm leaning against the side of the fire truck, and I said, did somebody set the air brakes on this thing? Because this fire truck's moving. And it was, in fact, that I was swaying back and forth. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the fire truck at all. And so they, once they did that, it was very quick. They just, a guy named James, one of the troopers, he takes pictures, says, okay. And right then I looked down, and they had the ambulance gurney right next to me. I don't know if it's old stubborn pride or something, but I looked at them. I said, you get that effing thing away from me. I'll walk to the ambulance. You're not gonna wheel me out of here. I said, I'll walk to the ambulance. And it's kind of a sense of pride, I guess, or just generally being stubborn. And so they walked me over, and then I got on the gurney where it was at the ambulance. So they loaded me up, and as soon as I felt the bump, and I was getting loaded up, it hit me what actually happened. And my Catholic faith hit me. And though we were always people, especially as Catholics, we joke around, we're born with guilt. And so it hit me, and I felt this actually a physical weight on my shoulders. And it hit me that I had, in my mind, originally, that I violated the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And so I said a Hail Mary as I'm in there really quick. And I look out the back of the ambulance, and I had tears coming out of my eyes because of the guilt. I honestly, I didn't care what the department did to me at that time, even though I knew the shooting was justified. But I had to answer to a higher authority later on. And so I look out the back of the ambulance, and the doors were still open. And there's two of my squad mates there. There was James, and there was a guy who was a former Army combat medic, and I always called him Doc. Mm-hmm. And I said that I told him, I said, James, you call my ALC attorney, our union attorney, tell him what happened. And then I looked at Doc, and I said, Doc, you call Father Art. You tell him what happened. You tell him I need him. And Father Art Navi, who's one of our chaplains, and Father Art would ride along with me. He would be pretty much the only ride along I would really like to take along with me, because we always joke when he would ride. He would ride along with me about once a month, once every other month, and we'd joke around that it's nice to get paid and or have confession and still be getting paid at the time. So Father, they called the ALC attorney, and then they called Father Art, or they called the our duty office, who makes all these notifications, and said, yeah, call Father Art out, tell him to go to Scottsdale Osborne Medical Center. So they closed the door, and we took off, and we were probably maybe 5-7 minutes from Scottsdale Osborne. Right before I left, somebody gave me my cell phone, and my wife was on the phone. And I said, all I could tell her was, honey, I said, I've been involved in a critical incident. I'm going to be okay. I can't tell you anymore other than somebody's going to be over at the house to pick you up. So just get ready. And she was actually just getting ready for bed. So they take me to Scottsdale Osborne, and they had listed me as a level 1 trauma. But when I got there, they realized, well, he's not a level 1 trauma other than he is by mechanism. So other than that, it was just, then things just start getting fuzzy, and there's a lot of gaps. And I remember this young doctor coming in, and I looked at him. I go, God, you're young enough to be my kid. And I looked at him. I said, does your mama know that you're out playing doctor tonight, especially with the street lights on? And and so we, and that's it was. I was deflecting everything with humor, and Father Art came in. He literally kicked everybody out of the treatment room, and closed the door, closed the drapes, and looks at me, and I said, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. And I said, oh, the only thing I can think of is, right now, Father, is I just killed a man. And so we had confession. And the minute I had that confession, the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. That physical weight that I was feeling was gone. And then that's when Father Art told me, he says, yeah, when I found out it was you, I knew I needed to get going. And I got over here in 38 minutes. And I go, Father, I've been hit in the head. I said, my head's still swimming. I said, this is not role reversal time. Okay. I am the confessor. You are not. And so we started laughing and stuff. And I just love the man to death.
Right.
And so they said, well, we're going to wheel you into CAT scan. So they wheel me into CAT scan, and I go, wait a minute, you guys, I said, well, guys aren't going to find anything, because you have to have a brain to be damaged before, you can find any damage.
Right.
And I'm trying to deflect everything with humor. And so when they wheel me back out, and the timeline is, probably about 45 minutes we're probably about 45 minutes to an hour at the hospital now. They wheel me out. And I remember looking and they're wheeling me back to the room, the treatment room in the trauma center there. And I look and I see Father Art standing next to my wife, who's sitting in a wheelchair. And I saw my wife start losing it. And I really kind of thought, I made it a mission that I was going to hide all the evil things that I had to deal with in my career for my wife and my kids. And that was the first time that I saw her lose it. I've been taken to the hospital before for other things. And I look back and it's, I've had 5, maybe 6 trips to the hospital in 34 years before I retired, and actually saw her start to lose it. And I said, well, I protected her for this long. And then she came in, and she just in, I guess, typical cop wife fashion, she, came up, grabbed my hand and said, oh, and we just started talking like it was just, I just happened to be laying in bed and at home. And she really she really held up. And so they came in, I had a chipped tooth, diagnosed with a severe concussion. I had my eye was still my left eye was still swollen shut. I had a couple lacerations on the top of my head, bumps and bruises, and all that stuff didn't hurt. I had this little abrasion right on my elbow. I was wearing a black uniform sweater and a long sleeve T-shirt underneath that, and that was the thing that hurt the most. I mean, that stung the whole time. I mean, everything else, I mean, just didn't compute. The couple detectives came in from our special investigations unit, which was kind of surreal because I've worked with both of those guys on boat before they went to investigations, and they took my uniform and stripped me down to a T-shirt, long johns. No long johns I had underneath my uniform pants and some wool socks. Everything else was taken as evidence. After that, I talked to them for a few minutes, and then not too long after that, the detective from Internal Affairs came in, and who a guy I work with on the road, and he said, yeah, they're going to do the criminal investigation, and then they'll be doing then we'll be doing the administrative investigation of this.
Well, I actually want to clarify for the folks listening the difference between a criminal and an administrative investigation as it relates to an officer-involved shooting. Administrative investigation is going to find facts regarding policy violations, stuff to do with the department's rules and regs, not necessarily laws. The criminal investigation is exactly what it sounds like. They're going to be picking this thing apart for however long it takes to determine whether or not the things that you did in that minute 30 seconds were justified, or if you've committed a crime. People don't realize if a police officer, state trooper shoots someone or kills someone, injures someone, assaults someone in a way that doesn't comport with the law, you can go to jail. That's a real thing.
Since I was stripped down to nothing, on the DUI squad, there was a sergeant and 5 troopers. And one of the troopers, a guy named Jess, he is a avid Ohio State football fan. He loves the Buckeyes. And, I'm a Notre Dame fan. I love my Fighting Irish. And for 3 months out of the year, we're just butting heads, who's the better team, and just on and on and on. Well, since I didn't have any clothes, I said, yeah, well, just give me some hospital scrubs, just because it's law school scrubs. They're great because during the summertime, you sleep in those. It's all comfortable. But they go, no, Jess has gone out and is going to get you clothes. The Fraternal Order of Police Lodge is paying for clothes for you to wear home. And it didn't really hit me how evil this guy could be. I mean, we love each other to death, but I mean, it's football season.
Oh, so, no.
Yeah. So he goes to the local 24-hour Walmart, and he brings me back this plastic Walmart bag. And on the top of the bag, there was a pair of camouflage slippers. And I go, oh, okay, well, he wants me to keep my feet warm, whatever. Right. Well, then I pull out this flannel thing, and I knew what it was. And I just yelled out, you son of a bitch, this is evil. And he goes, no, you got to wear it home. You got to wear it home. Well, I don't know if you could see it.
Oh man, I wish this was a video podcast so the folks at home could see that as well. But
well, it's a Christmas onesie with kiss me on the front and a little hood and mistletoe.
Right.
And the guy that was down there, that was my sergeant at the time, a great guy. Kerry is just love that guy to death. But that was just basically, that was me beaten up and how my squad mates rubbed salt in the wound. And I guess it's just a way of showing affection, but it's a very perverted way of showing affection. But if the roles were reversed, I think I would have done the same thing to Jess. So I was screaming out that I said, I'll walk home naked before I wear this thing.
Right.
Yeah. and it was 35, 40 degrees out. And so oh, no. And my sergeant says, oh, you got to wear it home. You got to wear it home. We get out, we go out to the car. One of the other chaplains, Sammy Jepson, he's one of our LDS chaplains, just a great guy. Just love Chaplain Sammy. He was going to give us a ride home. And the whole time that we're driving home, Sammy keeps looking over to his right. He kind of wants to smirk. He's smirking, but he doesn't want. He says, "Hey, you okay, Hugh?" And yeah, Chaplain Sammy, I'm good. I'm good. He keeps looking over and he's smirking, and I know he wants to laugh out loud at what I was wearing. Okay. So, and Sammy, he's a retired cop from Mesa, Arizona. We get home and get settled in, and after that, I couldn't sleep. But I wasn't pumped up. I was checking my pulse because I've had 2 heart attacks before that. And I was checking my pulse and, monitoring my breathing and things. But I needed to be out away from everything. So I went out into the garage and I just sit there, and by that time I looked at my cell phone and I had to run back into the bedroom to get the charger because I had received so many phone calls and messages in that 4-hour period from the time I pulled the trigger to the time I got home, 4.5 hours. I didn't hardly have any battery life left in my phone.
Wow.
And people were sending and we're talking, in the middle of the night. I mean, from 11:50 when I said 11:52 when I pulled the trigger to 4:30 in the morning when I got home, my phone was just blowing up. It was just so. Anyways, so I put the charger in, and I sit there and I just, I'm just going to go through social media. I'm just going to look at the Facebook page, and just kind of just chill out and just relax and try to think about what is all going on or what all went on. And I was out there, and then at 6 a.m., my phone rings, and my phone's been ringing. I just had to ignore calls and I needed to be, by myself, so to speak. And I get this phone call right at about 6 a.m. And it was from the deputy director of DPS, Heston Silver, and who is now our director. Heston called me up and says, "Hugh, I just found out what happened. I want to make sure you're okay. Is there anything I need?" And I said, "Boss, I'm good. I really am. I just kind of trying to accept what actually went on." So he says, "This is my personal cell phone number, and if you need anything." And the whole time I'm thinking, yeah, like I'm going to violate the chain of command. If I need a new pair of socks or something, yeah, I'm really going to call the deputy director on that one and say. And I was up until about 9 a.m. and that was about the time I started dozing off.
After that morning, you'd had a conversation with the deputy director, which is a little unusual. But moving forward, how did your life change? No one can go through an incident like this and be the same person they were 24 hours prior. And when I ask how did your life change, I know you probably had to tell a lot of people were calling you and asking what happened. And I know it's frequently very difficult to talk about this stuff, even the immediate aftermath. So how did you handle that?
Yeah, first it was the criminal investigation. You get called in and for an in-depth criminal interview, and you have your attorney there because it's in the eyes of the law, it's still considered a homicide. Sure. And they need to investigate the homicide and make sure my actions were fit within the confines of the Arizona revised statutes, our state laws. The first 24 hours, and like I said, my phone was blowing up. And I finally just realized I needed to turn my phone off because I wasn't getting any sleep. Of course, during all that time, you have to go see the department therapist, as well as, I had to do follow-ups for my concussion. I had to go to a neurologist, and it was all workman's comp. And I got to tell you, if any cops out there are listening, take care of yourself. Workman's comp, they're going to try to shortchange things, and in some ways they did with me. And I'm not a really big fan of the way Arizona workman's comp is handled out here, because it's contracted out through a private company. And private companies, they want to make profits, and they don't want to spend a whole lot of money. But that was my issue with the medical side. Our department therapist is just fantastic. I walked in like any other old school cop, saying, "Yeah, I got to go see the shrink. I'm going to spend an hour with her, and I'm going to be done." And if I found out that I wasn't done, she said, "Well, I'll see you in a few weeks." And I said, "Well, she goes, "Oh, we need to talk about it." And she says, she asked me, she goes, "How long you've been a cop?" And I said, 32 years. She goes, "Well, we have 32 years of BS to get through." And I said, "Well, we might as well make an appointment every day from now until the end of time. We might be able to scratch the surface." But dealing with, and her name's Dr. Rob, just a wonderful, wonderful lady. Just can't say enough good things about her. A couple days after my shooting, a very good friend of mine and his wife came over. He had been involved in a fatal shooting about 2 years before. He looks at me and goes, "Hugh, I love you to death. You're like you're my mentor." And he said, "But there's some things in my shooting that I couldn't tell you about until now because you've never been through it." And we sat out my front porch for just a couple hours, and a lot of the things that he experienced was a lot of things I was experiencing. Just when I fired my weapon, I didn't have any hearing protection on, but the sound of the discharge was muffled, and it was at night, and I didn't see the muzzle flash, even though I was literally a foot and a half away from the muzzle. And but there's just some things that you really don't understand until you've been there. The criminal investigation was by our detectives was done in about 2 months, and with all the interviews. And, I read the report, and it was 599 pages. And by looking at it, I was looking at a vast majority of these people that were doing the investigation. And it's just not just those two detectives. It was, we're talking about over a dozen people that were involved just in the investigative process for the criminal side. And then we had the criminal interview, which the criminal interview lasted for about 3.5 hours. We took breaks, but and it was very taxing during that. And the biggest weight was for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office to review the case. The COVID-19 thing, they were kind of hiding behind that. And basically, they just had one attorney reviewing all of these officer-involved shootings. And we had from my shooting to about 2 months later, we had something like 6 or 7 officer-involved shootings in Maricopa County alone, and a couple of them were high-profile cases. So, of course, those went to the top of the stack. And they had told me, they said, "Well, we don't see any problem with your shooting. It's just that we have to review the cases by priority." And so it was actually from the time I pulled the trigger to the time I received a letter from the county attorney was 1 year and 3 months to be criminally cleared.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, you tell from the comments on some of our badge cam videos, I think a lot of people think a police officer gets into a shooting, They blow the smoke from the muzzle. They holster their gun. They high five all the cops back at the station. They go home. They kiss the wife on the head, and they tell war stories about it for the rest of their life. Nothing could be further from the truth. When a police officer is in a critical incident like this, not only does it change his or her life forever, not only is there post-traumatic stress, no matter how justified the shooting was, you're going to suffer post-traumatic stress unless you're a robot. You're going to have potentially marital issues, financial issues. You're going to be on the bubble for a year, potentially a year and 6 months, not knowing if you're going to have a job or a pension, not knowing if you're going to be charged with a crime. Those are still on the table, and there's no guarantee that those things won't happen.
We're investigated the same way as anybody else. Just because we wear a uniform and we have peace officer authority, we're under a microscope because of everything we do, and because they, people will say that, well, he had the training, he had this, and the bottom line is that we're human beings. We make mistakes. I mean, if I were to say that the law enforcement is a perfect profession, I'd be the biggest fool in the world. We are not a perfect profession because Daryl Gates, former chief of the LAPD, said that he would have a perfect agency if he didn't have to recruit from the human race. And because of our training, that people will expect more of us, and I agree with that.
And they should, yeah.
The bottom line is that we're still human. And I was diagnosed with PTSD, and not just from the shooting, but from a couple incidents before, where I had to. One night, I spent a whole entire 10-hour shift doing next to kin notifications on a crash, a car crash that happened between Casa Grande and Tucson. And one of them was I had to tell a woman that her only 2 kids were not coming home. And of course, when I got and now I 4 death notifications, and that was just very taxing. And I went home and I did it the old school way. You come home, and how do you deal with it? And I brought out a 6-pack and a half bottle of vodka, and I sat out on my back porch, and my wife came out and looked at me and said, "You had a bad day?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I had a real bad day, and I just don't want to talk about it." And I wouldn't recommend that, by the way. Not just it doesn't eliminate the demons, and then you wake up with a hangover, and
the demons are still there.
So, but and then we have just last week, my wife and I attended a emergency responders assistance program seminar down in Scottsdale, which is a 4-day seminar, and it was half training and half therapy, and it was just fantastic, because you're not just talking with people, that you're not dealing with cops. You're talking about dispatchers. You're talking about firefighters. I mean, and their spouses. And we forget, when we leave for work, we forget about what is going on at home, because we can't have that in our head. I mean, it's very distracting. We don't think about what our spouses go through. And I remember on my last day when I came home, they had a little retirement celebration for me over in a little small town called Heber, where I patrolled at the firehouse there. And we came, my wife and I came home, and I took off what I call my monkey suit, my uniform. And she looks at me, she comes up to me, and I was standing in the kitchen, and she wraps her arms around me, and she looks at me. Oh, excuse me. She looks at me and says, she says, "Can I stop worrying now?" anyways, we forget what the spouses and our children go through. I mean, we're gone, 10, 12, 14 hours, in my house, we had a 2-hour rule. If I was going to be home late, anything more than 2 hours, I would make a phone call. Say, I'm just going to be late. That's it. And, I don't know when, or, well, I'm going to be a couple hours late, probably about 2 or 3 hours. We had that rule. And, Lord help me if I violated that rule. I mean, the wrath would be unbelievable. But, we have, I think everybody in a way has, that has PTSD, has triggers, and something that we have to deal with, and but we have to accept it. And it is, for 34 years on the job, I always had this little safe in the back of my head where I would see something that was real ugly, or something that I just needed to not remember, or try to forget about, and I'd put it in that safe. And and now and again, the safe would pop open, and a few memories would come out, and I would mentally take those memories and put them back in the safe. And I can say that I see the guy's face every day. I can blink my eyes and I can see his face, literally right in front of my face. And he was a very, very disturbed young man. And I've never been one to forgive. It takes a lot for me to forgive. And I guess that's one of the challenges I've had in my Catholic faith. But, my wife and I were coming home from the store about a couple months ago, and we started talking about it. And I told her, I said, I forgive this guy. And she was shocked. I said, I hated what he was doing, but based upon everything, and based upon everything he had gone through over, and his mental health problems, and then being trespassed from the Islamic Center, and he was Muslim, so you would think that this guy his people have now turned his back, and that would make anybody snap. Sure. And based upon that, I've forgiven him. Like I said, I hated what he did. I didn't want it to go that far. But I've forgiven him as a person, and that's something that I've never thought of ever having to do.
If you're listening to this and there's somebody in your life, it doesn't have to be a shooting, incident. It could be anything. But there's someone in your life that's hurt you, or done something to you like that. Remember, forgiveness is not for them; it's for you. You've got to let that go. Mm-hmm. And exactly. When you do forgive somebody, it takes a weight, a big weight off your shoulders. A couple things I want to say before I got to let you go. This is related. We're not going to talk about whether or not Mr. Kyle Rittenhouse is guilty of anything or not. There's an ongoing criminal trial right now. Everyone's watching it. But if you saw him on the stand as he's talking about the shooting incident that happened that night in Kenosha, and they're asking him specifics about what happened and when, you can, if you've been through an incident like that, you can watch the triggers go off in his head as he's reliving that moment, as he's reliving the moment he had to pull the trigger on someone. And I can tell you, I'm 100% sure that panic attack he had, those tears that you saw were very real. He was not making anything up. That was a very real moment, and I've lived that moment. I was in law enforcement more or less for about 30 years. And when you talk about that vault, that safe in the back of your head, I know exactly what you mean. Every abused kid, every person bleeding out from a gunshot wound or a car accident, every next of kin notification gets put in there. And, hopefully, God willing, Hugh, somebody listening, some officer out there, some firefighter out there, some Marine out there will hear what you've had to say today, and it will help them. The reason we're doing this show is not to talk about the gory, violent details of an incident. That's kind of not even the point. The point is to help people understand what a critical incident's really like, what it's like to go through, what it's like afterwards. And we don't blow the smoke off our muzzle, holster our gun, and go home and kiss our wife, and everything's great. There's no high-fiving going on. And I think what you've said today on this show, first of all, thank you for making it easy for me. I didn't have to ask you hardly any questions. And I think what you've had to say here is going to help people out after their critical incident, or even better, prepare them for it when it does happen, that they will know ahead of time what some of these things might be. Hugh, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I know it's not easy to talk about this stuff. I know personally it's not easy to talk about this stuff, and I appreciate you sharing your story, your experience, and I think it's going to help people. So thanks again for being here, buddy.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Michael, and it's been a pleasure.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Gutowski Files. We have him every week. You know him, you love him, Stephen Gutowski, the founder of TheReload.com, host of the weekly Reload podcast. And this week we have two interesting stories. One is that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is upholding the California magazine confiscation scheme. And second, deals with Mr. Alec Baldwin and a rather shambolic interview on ABC where he makes some pretty wild claims, in my opinion. And we'll talk about that as well. Stephen, welcome. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. As you know, Stephen and I are fans of the Washington football team and the Philadelphia Eagles, and it is exciting, folks. We are neck and neck to round out the basement of the wild card round, hopefully.
Right around 500, just like all the good teams want to be.
Exactly. NFC East, when I was a kid, was something was a powerhouse, and now it's just sort of, it's been for, I don't know, a couple decades as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, the Eagles had one Super Bowl.
That's true.
And then, immediately after that, no one has really been good.
Right. Correct. Accurate. So the first article we're going to talk about by your reporter, Jake Fogelman, came out on November 30th, and it involves the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upholding a California magazine confiscation scheme. Not a ban, but a confiscation scheme. So that means they want to take existing high, quote-unquote, high-capacity magazines from people. Want to talk to us about that, Stephen?
Yeah, so this is a law that had been challenged since the day it was passed. I believe it was actually passed by referendum, but essentially it lowered the magazine restriction from, I believe it was 15 rounds down to 10. So a similar thing happened in New Jersey recently as well. But these are the only two states where you've seen something like this, where they lowered the restriction and then they made anything that still held more than 10 rounds illegal to possess, not just to sell. And so that is obviously a confiscation order. Now, it's not one that they are necessarily going around and enforcing door to door or anything like that. But, when you're not allowed to possess the item, that's confiscation. So it's been challenged in the courts. They got a favorable ruling. The plaintiffs, they were able to block this law at the lower level of the federal court review. And then even at the appellate level at first, the way that they do it is first they have a panel of 3 judges look at it. And then if one of the parties involved wants to, they can appeal to the entire court. It's called an en banc hearing. And that's what happened in this case. And it's the Ninth Circuit, so it has a well-earned reputation for being unfriendly to challenges to the gun laws in that part of the country, especially California. And so that's what we saw again here. The Ninth Circuit, the full court, upheld California's law. They give quite a lot of deference to the state when it comes to regulating firearms. That's been their tradition. In fact, one of the judges who was dissenting in this 7-4 ruling claimed that essentially the court would allow any restriction to stand, that they haven't struck down any of the strict gun laws that California has put into place or any of the other states in the Ninth Circuit. And so he was pretty harsh. I believe it was Judge Fitzgerald was very harsh in his dissent in this ruling. The majority effectively said that magazine restrictions do not significantly burden Second Amendment rights. Essentially, you can still defend yourself with magazines that hold 10 or less rounds, and it's not a categorical ban on all of a category of guns like handguns, in the Heller case. So that's their justification, that they believe it's not significantly burdening the Second Amendment to pass these sorts of restrictions, even to the point where they ban possession.
Yeah, in the article by Mr. Fogelman, there's a quote from Judge Susan Graber. Quote, nothing in the record suggests that the restriction imposes any more than a minimal burden on the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Similarly, the record suggests at most a minimal burden, if any burden at all, on the right of self-defense in the home. Well, I mean, a minimal burden is still a burden, and I would contend that the idea of lower or higher capacity magazines making a significant difference in say a mass shooting is pretty minimal. I mean, as I've said before, I can reload an AR all day long with 10-round magazines, and the difference in the number of rounds I'm able to fire is pretty minimal. Let me ask you this. Do you think this will make its way to the Supreme Court?
I think the Supreme Court is likely to take up a case like this at some point. Now, this case doesn't create what's called a circuit split. So this is in line with what was ruled in the New Jersey case, which is currently pending before the Supreme Court. So it doesn't really add any new urgency for the court to take a case like this. Whereas like they're doing gun carry right now, right out of New York. Well, that there was a circuit split in that case, meaning that one of the circuits, like the Ninth Circuit, there's the Second Circuit, the Third Circuit, one of them disagreed with the other circuits in terms of whether or not the strict nature of New York's gun carry law, that type of policy violates the Second Amendment, where we haven't had that same kind of ruling yet at the circuit level on this question on magazine restrictions. Probably will at some point, I would imagine, but this case probably doesn't have that kind of legal impact. It has obviously a very significant practical impact on people who live in the Ninth Circuit and specifically in California, but it doesn't necessarily advance the legal situation very much. But I would be surprised if this didn't eventually become something that makes its way to the Supreme Court. Also, it was Judge Van Dyke is the dissenting judge that I was talking about earlier. And he, to your point that you're making, he says it should be presumptively constitutional to burden constitutional rights. But looking at our court's cases, you would assume that any burden on the right to bear arms is presumptively permitted. I've discussed before how our circuit's version of Second Amendment, quote, heightened scrutiny has no height. It is practically indistinguishable from a rational basis review. So the court was going through their review of this law in what's called heightened scrutiny, which is supposed to be this higher level of scrutiny beyond just that the government can come up with some sort of rational reason why the law is necessary. You're supposed to look at whether the law is focused on the goals that it's trying to achieve. In this case, it's gun safety and preventing mass shootings or reducing their deadliness. And they're supposed to weigh that against the right being infringed and how much it's impacted. And Judge Van Dyke, one of the dissenting judges, says, well, they don't really do that, is what he's saying. They just sort of assume that anything that California passes is presumptively constitutional when it comes to guns.
And to quote a TV insurance commercial, that's not how any of this works. I mean, it's just not. Interesting quote from him. So moving on to the next story, some of you, our listeners, may have seen or heard about Alec Baldwin granting an interview to ABC News, to George Stephanopoulos. This story from December 2nd from thereload.com, title analysis, Alec Baldwin's gun could have fired without him pulling the trigger, but did it. That's by our friend Stephen Gutowski over at thereload.com. Talk to us about that. You and I spoke offline briefly about this, but I'm not nearly as familiar with single action or cowboy style revolvers as you are, obviously. So talk us through this real quick and his claim and what you think the merits of that claim are.
Sure. Yeah. So in theory, a single action army replica, which is what the police say Baldwin was using when he fired that fatal shot, could be fired without the trigger being pulled. I mean, technically any gun could fire without the trigger being pulled, but generally speaking, it requires a significant mechanical malfunction or defect in the gun, because all guns, especially these days, are designed with certain internal safeties that require the trigger to be pulled in order for a round to be fired, right? I mean, that's even if you drop a gun, we have drop safeties now, and that keeps the gun a lot safer. It eliminates this possibility of the gun just going off. As much as you commonly hear this reported, people say that the gun just went off, that, whenever there's an accidental shooting or a negligent discharge, as we, call them on the training side of things. But that's really not very realistic in the vast majority of situations, right? However, with the single action army, there's a scenario if you have the hammer completely decocked, sitting on a loaded chamber. The problem with that scenario with these old style revolvers is that the firing pin protrudes into the chamber and can rest on that primer. And obviously, if you have a sharp jolt in some way, that could set off that primer and set off the round. However, Baldwin's story, when we got more details of it, right? Because at first they just put out his statement that he hadn't pulled the trigger. But then when the full interview came out, his explanation for how this happened was, while I was pulling I didn't have my finger on the trigger, but I was pulling, or I guess he just said he never pulled the trigger. And that sort of semantics might be an explanation for what happened. But he said, I never pulled the trigger. I was pulling the hammer back. And then when I released the hammer, the round went off. Now, the problem with this explanation is, again, that design of that gun. When you pull the hammer back, there's 3 different sears that it catches on as you pull it back. There's the quarter cock, there's sort of safety notch. Then there's the half cock, which you use to revolve a cylinder manually on a single action so you can load and unload it. And then there's full cock, which is, fully cocked, ready to fire gun. And it's not really possible on that design to pull the hammer back far enough and release it to set off a primer without catching one of those sears. And so the way he describes it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Doesn't sound likely at all, unless, again, there was some sort of mechanical problem with the gun, some sort of serious defect, like the sears were worn out. Maybe that quarter cock sear was completely gone. But that would be something that'd be fairly obvious, and something you could certainly something the police can examine the gun and find out. But you would think people on set would also have noticed if the gun was broken before the scene was filmed. So that's, again, like, it seems unlikely to me. Much more likely is he either pulled the trigger normally and just didn't realize it, because single actions obviously have fairly light triggers, or he had the gun depressed the whole time. He didn't consider that pulling the trigger. But if you hold down the trigger on a single action army and you pull that hammer back and then release it, it's going to go forward, because the trigger is going to keep all those sears out of the way. And that you could certainly fire a negligent discharge that way.
Yeah, so some of the old, westerns, the old Clint Eastwood movies, where he would do what's called fanning the gun. He would just hold the trigger down and just work that hammer with his support hand, which, by the way, is a terrible way to shoot, regardless.
Yeah, I don't think you'd be hitting very much doing that, but that is how that works.
Yeah, a couple things I think are worth noting. One, if you were born before last night, you know that Mr. Stephanopoulos and ABC are probably very sympathetic to Mr. Baldwin. They all have the same sort of political beliefs. This is conjecture, of course, on my part. And what we're seeing...
Well, I think they're actually friends in real life.
So, in what we're seeing, the finished product on the television, on the news program, is a heavily edited version. So they were able to pick and choose what we saw, what we didn't see. So there's no telling what was said by him that a lawyer whispered in his ear. We don't say that, Mr. Baldwin. I'm not sure why he's making a statement at all. I think it's a terrible idea from a legal standpoint, for him to go out and make any public statement. He doesn't need to. I wouldn't. If I were his attorney, I would advise him not to, just in case there is some liability, down the road for him. And the other point I think is worth noting is that none of this should have mattered. There shouldn't have been a live round in that gun in the first place. So all of this is, it really comes down to, why was there a live round anywhere on that set, other maybe than inside the firearm or magazine of a security guard, perhaps, or an off-duty police officer or someone? Why was there live rounds anywhere near where they were going to be aiming potentially working guns at human beings?
Yeah, and there's a whole string of negligence that went into this problem. Whether or not the gun fired without the trigger being pulled is sort of the very last question to ask here, because you have the idea of, how did live ammunition get on set? How did it get into that gun? How did nobody check that gun? It went through 3 different people before it was fired. You know, Baldwin says he doesn't have any responsibility. This is another piece I just wrote actually for members of It's Reload 2, talking about how complacency was really the underlying problem here, because Baldwin said he was taught early on not to check the guns. Some prop master told him years ago that they don't, that the actor is not the last line of defense. They don't want the actor, but that's terrible advice, frankly. Like, I understand that you don't want the actor to be the primary person responsible for gun safety on a set, but the idea that they're just a vessel who has no agency in and of themselves. Same for the assistant director. He's making the same claims. They just had no responsibility. They just passed on the gun, and Baldwin was playing with it, pointing it at people, like, not playing with it, but, you know, acting with it and pointing it at people. And he was told to do that. So everything, there's no responsibility. It's like, that's not how gun safety works. This is why when we're training people at a range, when I train people to shoot, I tell them, like, if you see anything that anyone is doing that violates the safety rules, including me, you need to say something. It doesn't matter that I'm the instructor and you're the student. If anyone is breaking these rules, you need to speak up, or else somebody's going to get hurt. And that's what happened here. And nobody spoke up. Nobody took responsibility for what they were doing.
I think I might have made this point before, but if an actor, we'll leave Alec Baldwin alone for today. If an actor were to be portraying a truck driver, you know, driving an 18-wheeler, and that actor actually had to get out on the freeway and operate an 18-wheeler, guess what I'm sure they would do before they did that? They would get some training in how to operate an 18-wheeler, because it's potentially a very dangerous thing in the hands of an inexperienced person. Sure. I'm hoping, this will probably never happen, but I'm hoping this incident will scare enough actors and directors and prop masters and armorers to where everybody who's going to interact with that gun should have some firearms training, some legit, including the actor. They should have to go shoot, take a course in gun safety. That way, there's
I think they do,
no excuses. You know? I know, but obviously didn't take.
Usually they do. Yeah, but the problem is they might take the class, or they might get a safety briefing, but then they're told, you know, if their attitude is, oh, I'll just do whatever this person tells me and I'll just trust them. That's terrible attitude to have when you're talking about gun safety. You know, you want to verify that that's the case.
100%.
And you can do it without having the actor be the person to manually unload the gun. Or you can have the armorer there. And some of them do this. Even Baldwin said this himself, that some armorers, and I've talked to one, Steve Wolf, who employs this exact procedure. They will come out before each shot. They will be the ones who take the gun and clear it and show that it's clear, show that it's set up properly before each shot, and show everyone, so that everyone can verify that that's the case, instead of just having to trust whoever says, oh, this is a cold gun, go ahead and use it. And then you had the issue of, I mean, there's a lot to talk about, right? You had the issue of them pointing the gun at crew in this shot anyway, which there may be scenarios where that's necessary on set. And in that case, you really need to go above and beyond normal safety rules. You need to treat it like force on force training would treat it, which is like pat down everyone who comes on set, make sure they got no live rounds. You know, you got to take extra precautions if you're doing something like that. But in this scenario, I don't see any reason why they had to point the gun at crew. Why did the crew have to be behind the camera for this? Why did they have to be using a real gun for if they're doing a setup shot? He described it as like some sort of B-roll that they were trying to capture that wasn't even necessarily going to be in the film. And so why use a real gun in that circumstance? Why not use a fake gun, you know, a rubber gun, whatever, you know, a cap gun? I don't care. You know, yeah. It's very odd. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And it seems like there's a lot of complacency. And I do wonder if it's industry wide, because, you know, this worked for Baldwin acting, this being a vessel, just doing whatever he was told without any attempt to verify the, you know, things he was being told. That worked for him for 40 years, right? Until it didn't work. Yep. And that's the problem, right? That's how these things happen. You get complacent, you get told some bad advice, you follow it, it works for a while, and then until it doesn't work.
I guess what I was trying to say is I hope that everyone paying attention will, in the future, perhaps get some because I don't know what kind of training they get or from whom. And as you and I both know, training isn't training necessarily. Right. Not every person who hangs out a firearms instructor shingle actually knows what they're doing or has the same stringent safety regulations. And I would imagine, again, speculation on my part, some FI somewhere or some range safety officer somewhere is now, okay, now you're teaching Alec Baldwin a class. Are you going to be as hard on Alec Baldwin as you are on John Smith walking through your door? If Alec Baldwin points a loaded gun at you accidentally, is he going home for the day like anybody else would? Probably not, because he's paying you however much money to be there. So I hope that there is a renaissance of training and awareness and just safety on movie sets, on television sets across around the world, because this, we do these badge cam videos, but sometimes there's a bad outcome. An officer or a deputy loses their life. And we do these so that people can learn lessons. Other law enforcement officers and private citizens can learn lessons from these senseless tragedies and hopefully won't repeat those same mistakes. So I hope that's the legacy of this young woman who passed away, is that this doesn't happen again, hopefully ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the same thing that you see in the dearth of quality with gun safety trainers, you can see with armorers on the set of movies. Like, clearly some of them are better than others. This was a new armorer, somebody who hadn't done much of this before. It was her second movie, and perhaps she wasn't as confident in calling people out when they weren't doing things quite the way that would make the most sense. And that's where you need other people. You need someone like Alec Baldwin, who has that level of gravitas and experience, to be the one to say, oh, I don't know, does this make sense the way we're doing this? Is this safest possible practice? Should we do this in a different way? Anyone. It didn't have to be Alec Baldwin, though. It could have been anyone on set. Honestly, right. Anyone who was there watching that scene, seeing a gun being pointed at staff, at the crew, anyone should have stood, anybody, and nobody did. And that's the problem. Like, even with this whole side question about whether he pulled the trigger or whatever, how the gun went off, you're setting up a scenario where if the gun does go off, someone's getting killed. And that's exactly what happened. And anybody on set could have recognized that was a problem.
Yeah, and we're running along here, but I do want to point out, we mentioned this before, previously discussing this same tragedy. This whole thing was evidently being rushed. People were being rushed to get stuff done, being rushed to get there. People working insane hours. And so I think, and I don't know enough about what goes on the set of a movie or a TV show, but you would hope there would be like a safety ombudsman, just somebody who has carte blanche to say, let's stop right here and check this thing. Let's check the pyrotechnics. Let's check let's check this vehicle to make sure it's safe to do this stunt. And for the love of God, let's check these firearms and make sure that they are actually safe. Let's get our terminology down, first of all, versus safe versus cold or whatever we're going to call the gun. There's a lot of moving parts. But again, I hope this is the last time we have to read about a story like this. And of course, we said it before, our prayers go out to that young woman and her family. And Stephen, I just want to thank you again for being here this week. Folks, if you are lamenting the lack of down-the-middle, sane, sober reporting on the Second Amendment and firearms in general, please go over to thereload.com. Pay this man a couple of bucks so he can continue doing what he's doing this fantastic work, and check out the weekly Reload podcast. I was on it. John Correa was on it. My friend Wendy Hoffman was on it. It's absolutely great information. I just listened to the latest one myself this morning, getting ready for this interview. Stephen, buddy, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey friends, this is John Correa. If you like the podcast, if it is bringing you value, do me a favor. Just rate the podcast and leave us a rating and a review. It really helps us out.